So, I want to offer some thoughts, some Dharma thoughts about fear. The last few weeks have been so challenging for so many of us, for most of us. And I live in LA, so, add an extra week, we had the fires and a lot of you were impacted by that. I wasn't personally, thankfully, but I know a lot of people who were, and then all the stuff that's happened in the last few weeks. I don't have to spell it out. And so I've been talking about that a lot in classes on how to hold the space and how to be present. And I thought really what's important, I thought for this week, I wanted to talk about the heart practices, the beautiful qualities, the Brahma Viharas, the Tibetan tradition calls the four immeasurables, and that's loving kindness, compassion, appreciative joy, equanimity, because they're really important. And when I was thinking about this earlier this week, I realized that when the Buddha taught the Metta Sutta, it was an antidote to fear. So if you're not familiar with the story, there were a group of about 500 monks, and 500 is a number that's used quite often in the suttas, meaning a lot. And so there were 500 monks, and he invited them to go find a place and meditate. Go find some place, and they found this grove that was beautiful. And the people in the village nearby were very happy to have them there. We're happy to offer alms to them so they could practice. And there were tree devas, and devas are these unseen beings. And so there were tree devas that when the monks first came, they were like, oh, this is cool. But then the monks stayed there, and the monks stayed there, and the monks stayed there. And the tree devas got really annoyed because it was like, dudes, this is our grove. What are you doing? And so what they did is I found this in an article. This is a quote from this article, Metta and Burnout. It said, using their supernatural powers, the tree devas transformed themselves into wrathful demons and went around the grove shrieking and moaning, while all around them wafted a stench so awful that even the trees began to wither. So these monks were terrified, and they went running back to the Buddha, and the Buddha said, okay. And what he did is he taught them the Metta Sutta. If you're familiar, probably many of you are familiar with the Metta Sutta, may all beings be free. It's a sutta of love. And so they learned the sutta, and they went back to the grove, and they chanted it, day and night. They chanted it. And when the devas heard the sutta, their hearts were suffused with love. They were touched by these wishes of kindness and compassion to all beings, born, unborn, seen, unseen. And so from that moment on, the devas decided to protect the monks. So it was the monks opened their hearts, and the devas received them and reciprocated with this love. So it's this beautiful, beautiful quality. And so it's really important, I think, in this time of fear, to be mindful and be willing to open to love in our hearts. Find that in our hearts, because that's where we find liberation and freedom. And it can be such a challenging practice, both for ourselves and for others. Both for ourselves and for others. But it's really, really important. And Ruth King, who is a wonderful teacher, she says, metta, which is loving kindness, or also goodwill, it's translated a couple of ways. She said, metta is the antidote for the gripped heart, for aversion, and for those ways that we hold ourselves captive. It's the elixir, the lubricant for the joints and the hardness of life. It's a beautiful practice to soften and open the heart, to build atmosphere and influence the weather so that whatever arises in our hearts and minds in this atmosphere of friendliness and kindness. So it's this beautiful practice so that we're not gripped. that we soften ourselves so that we don't harden our insides. And the Visuddhimagga is this, is something that was written in the 5th century. It was several hundred years after the Buddha died. It was written by Buddhaghosa, this monk in Sri Lanka. And it's basically a systemization of the suttas, the Buddha's discourses. And that is where Buddhaghosa delineates the practices that I'm sure many of you are familiar with, the practice of reciting phrases to yourself, may I be happy, to other beings, may you be happy, may they be happy, of various classical phrases that he offered. That came later. What the Buddha taught is that through this insight practice of being fully present, of being open to the moment, what happens eventually is this arising of kindness and compassion. It's just this natural arising of this clarity and wisdom that we see. But many of us, it's because of our conditioning, because of the world we live in, need this extra help. And maybe that's why the teaching of the Visuddhimagga is so helpful, to use these phrases to bring a really concentrated practice. And in this Visuddhimagga, I love this. Buddhaghosa says, it's the metta is the solvent that melts the psychic pollutants of anger and resentment. So we're talking 2,600 years of people going. I think there were other people also who said, famous people in the past, who said love is the important answer. And again, it sounds so counterintuitive, because if people are being horrific, you want to shut yourself down, but then you're just constricted and you walk around like this, when instead we want to offer this loving kindness. And it's not, and I love this other thing, there's we're not doing it necessarily for the other person. I mean, we want to open our hearts to the other people, but we're doing it for ourselves. We're doing it so that we're not so constricted and tight. Tanasaru Bhikkhu is a monk. He has a metta monastery in Escondido. You might know him as Ajahn Jeff. He's a great teacher. And he says, the first thought in generating goodwill has to be that you're doing this for yourself, so that you can protect yourself from your greed, your hatred, your ill will. And he also says, and this is really important, we open our hearts to others. He says, I have goodwill for you, but now you have to leave. You know, we have this clarity that's saying, oh, there are people in this world who are causing great harm. And just because I have my heart open to them doesn't mean I have to put up with any of that. We invite people into our hearts, but not into our homes. There's a boundary that this clarity, this wisdom, this discernment, that's also fruit of this practice, allows us to see when people are causing harm, allows us to see when that's going on and say, I'm not going to shut my heart to you. I'm not going to, like, what did they say? I'm not going to drink poison and wait for you to die. You know, I'm going to have this open-heartedness for my own benefit, but y'all are held accountable for your actions and you have to go somewhere else. The boundaries. I was at I don't know if any of you have heard of like 5 rhythm stance. I did some of that yesterday, and it's really a beautiful kind of thing. Anyway, the woman who offered it was saying that it's like this, we have this, and she wasn't talking about metta, but it's the same concept where we have this softness on the inside and a harderness on the outside. Not like a harshness, but that we have this protection from this, you know, we have this clarity to see when harm is being done. And Tanjev says, you know, you realize that your most important wealth is the state of your mind. And you want to protect that above all. And so I don't want to walk around with this, Y'all have probably felt that recently. It's not pleasant. It's not pleasant to have that gripping, that and how do you back away from that? It's really important, and Tanasa Rabiku says again, when they talk about having goodwill for all beings, it's not this complacent Buddhist bubble that some people think it is. That idiot compassion that Pema Chodron talks about, which is a Tibetan phrase, I believe. It's this idiot compassion when it's like, oh, I have to have compassion for you, and I don't care what you do. It's not that. We have clarity. There's the heart mind is involved. There's wisdom and compassion. They work together. If you have just wisdom, you're kind of really analytical and could be cold. If you have just the compassion, there's no clarity, there's no discernment. So the two of them work together. This heart mind. There's no separation. There's this beautiful quality that guides how we move through the world. And I read this, I read a lot of good books last year, and I read this one. I read a lot of books on love. And this is All About Love by Bell Hooks, which I think the book club read last year. And it's really lovely. And she's had one thing about fear versus love in here, and I just want to read that. She said, cultures of domination rely on the cultivation of fear as a way to ensure obedience. In our society, we make much of love and say little about fear, yet we are all terribly afraid most of the time. As a culture, we're obsessed with the notion of safety, yet we do not question why we live in states of extreme anxiety and dread. Fear is the primary force upholding structures of domination. It promotes the desires for separation, the desire to not be known. When we are taught that safety lies always with sameness, then difference of any kind will appear as a threat. When we choose to love, we choose to move against fear, against alienation and separation. The choice to love is a choice to connect, to find ourselves in the other. And that reminds me of another book I read last year, which I probably have mentioned because I talk about it all the time because it was so powerful. It's a book called See No Stranger by Valerie Kaur, Kaur. And she's a Sikh. And the teachings of her beliefs, her religion, are that no one is a stranger. And when she meets someone she doesn't know, she says, you are a part of me I do not know yet. So to have that recognition of our interconnectedness, our interbeing, as Thich Nhat Hanh said, is so important, and it keeps us from that aversion. It's like, okay, this is a part of me I do not know, and we bring wonder to it. We bring curiosity, because when we dehumanize somebody else, it's so easy just to dismiss them. But we want to have an open-heartedness, a compassion for them, but also say, you have to go away, have that clarity and that wisdom. And I was talking a bit ago about this, the practice of kindness, metta, for ourselves, and how that can be really difficult. Just as it can be difficult for difficult people, it can be difficult for ourselves. I think a lot of it is cultural. Many of you have heard the story of the Dalai Lama, and there was a meeting of International Buddhist Conference at Dharamsala back in the 90s, and Sharon Salzberg, who wrote the book Loving Kindness, asked the question about how do you do metta for self when there's self-loathing, and he had no idea what she was talking about. And that brought me great hope, because it's like, oh, it's not built in. Maybe it's cultural, because we live in a society that says, it's not there yet. You need to do a little bit more, a little bit more productive. You don't really need 2 days off each week, do you? You can work on the weekend, right? You don't have to 8 hours a day, maybe 10, there's always that little voice. So to have that softening towards ourselves and that self-acceptance, it requires some forgiveness for ourselves. And she says self-acceptance is so hard for many of us because we've learned to believe negativity is more realistic. It appears more real than any positive voice. And, neuroscience has said, and Rick Hansen, who's a wonderful Buddhist teacher, who's a neuropsychologist, he talks about we have this negativity bias, which is old, we've got to be, but we don't have a lot of saber-toothed tigers around anymore. But to recognize, and yeah, we have to pay attention, but if we're mindful and aware, we are paying attention. But not to give precedence to the negativity. Say, is that actually true? This is the beauty of mindfulness, and being present. Beginner's mind. What is this? Is this an old story or is this real? Be willing for that. And there's another piece in here, another sentence about forgiveness. This is from a book called Forgiveness, A Bold Choice for a Peaceful Heart. And it says, forgiveness is a way of life that gradually transforms us from being helpless victims of our circumstance to being powerful and loving co-creators of our reality. It's the fading away of the perceptions that cloud our ability to love. When we forgive ourselves, we take away all those barriers and we can open and be kind and compassionate to us in this moment. And and to be honest and to be accountable. Yeah, maybe we did cause harm. We all caused harm. Every single one of us has caused harm. I've caused a great deal of harm. But when I reflect on that, I realize it's because I was lost in my own fear. I didn't know it, but I was trying to take care of myself. And my fear spilled out onto others. I was unskillful. And I can be accountable for that, but I can also forgive myself for that because my intention is not to do that anymore. And my mindfulness hopefully keeps me from doing that. And I was having this conversation with someone the other night, and I've heard it said, and I've read it from teachers, that if we are fully mindful in the moment, we really can't cause harm. And we're not driven by greed or hatred. We can't cause harm because we see the full ramifications of our actions. So being present allows us to soften to ourselves and to others. And when we begin to look at how we have metta in our lives, have loving kindness in our lives, in the Brahma Viharas, they talk about they have near enemies and far enemies, and the far enemies are the obvious and antithesis of loving kindness. The antithesis is anger, aversion, aggressiveness, and the antidote to that far enemy is forgiveness. And then the near enemy, which is something that seems like it, but it's not quite, in the near enemy of metta, loving kindness, goodwill, is attachment and desire. We have an expectation of how it's supposed to turn out, or there's a conditionality to our goodwill. I will love you if. And the problem with that is the Buddha said, these are unconditional. Or we have attachment to a certain outcome, a desire. Desire is not bad in itself, but when we have an attachment to something, that's when it becomes problematic. So to let go of all of those things, really see clearly and to let go. And Sharon Salzberg says the fading away of greed, the fading away of hatred is the foundation for our liberation. Because when we hate something, we don't like the way it is. And if we can say, this is the way it is right now, it's like this, I can be present with it, work to change it if necessary. It doesn't mean we become complacent. We live in that complacent Buddhist bubble, as Tanjev said. We say, oh, this is not okay, and I'm going to work to end it or work to fix it. You know, we have to work at it. And Sharon also said that it's an awareness so powerful that there's no turning back. I mean, many of you have been practicing for a while, and it's like, I know I've been practicing for a while, and it's like, you know what, I don't want to go back to being deluded. Because even though there's this capacity to feel things I ran from my whole life, turning towards them is a lot easier than running from them, because they're always nipping at your heels or trying to claw their way out. And it's like, I was miserable when I couldn't turn towards what was going on. And now that I can, there is a liberation, there is a freedom, you know, and we have to work at it, both in our lives, in our community. And then I love the book all about love, because Bell Hooks read, I think, a bazillion books about love, and she synthesized them all in this book, so I don't have to read all those other books. But she talked about Thomas Merton, who you may know who he is, this Jesuit priest who is very connected to Buddhism. Martin Luther King and Eric Fromm all emphasized that love is an active force that should lead us into greater communion with the world. It's an active force. It's not just a feeling that lands, but it's an action too. And I went on Wednesday night. There's a little theater in Hollywood, one of those black box theaters that I've been going to forever. And about a year and a half ago, they started this thing called Bits. And it's people doing different pieces that they're working on. If there's not finished things, but somebody will do, you know, a poem or a song or a spoken word, something or other. And they're profound and they're wonderful. And they're people coming together, being creative. And the next morning, I realized I had a hangover of joy and gratitude. To be with people in this way, of people just being open with each other and realizing that our greatest strength is our shared humanity. But we have to open to that. We have to be here for each other. We have to be here for ourselves and greet ourselves with tenderness, with goodwill, with softness. And when we have love, we have an antidote to fear. And I want to read this. Someone on Wednesday night read this. It's a piece from Heather Cox Richardson. Some of you know her. Yeah, you're nodding your head. She's a historian and she's writing every day, kind of documenting what's been happening on a daily basis. And she's great. So I hunted this down and I found it. And one of the really important things to remember going forward as we fear the rise of authoritarianism in the United States is that authoritarians cannot rise if there are strong communities and people acting with joy. That is, you need despair and anger in order for an authoritarian to rise. Think of the language that we hear from MAGA Republicans and how angry they are all the time. It's okay to say, I'm not going to pay attention to politics for a while, but it's not okay to stop bringing your best to the world. Whatever those things are that you bring to the community, do them and do them with joy. And don't stop doing the things you love because you're scared, because that actually is a form of resistance. Showing up and doing things you love says to an authoritarian, you have no place to root here. And that's going to be really important going forward. How often do you see the phrase, joy is an act of resistance? And it absolutely is. I am not going to be shut down. I am not going to not love, not going to get great joy out of my kitties. Not this driving out here this morning and the snow on the hills all the way from LA out here. It was stunning. We have to not miss that joy. And for that, we have to stay open. We have to stay open to it and be gentle. All right, I'm reading a lot today, but I'm going to read one more thing that I did a search on my laptop for something and this came up and I didn't even remember I had it. But it says how to open your heart. It's a poem, I think, by Jeff Foster. And he says, do not try to open your heart. That would be a subtle movement of aggression towards your immediate embodied experience. Never tell a closed heart it must be more open. It will shut more tightly to protect itself, feeling your resistance and disapproval. A heart unfurls only when conditions are right. Your demand for openness invites closure. This is the supreme intelligence of the heart. Instead, bow to the heart in its current state. If it's closed, let it be closed. Sanctify the closure. Make it safe, safe even to feel unsafe. Trust that when the heart is ready and not a moment before, it will open, like a flower in the warmth of the sun. There is no rush for the heart. Trust the opening and the closing too, the expansion and the contraction. This is the heart's way of breathing, safe, unsafe, safe, unsafe. The beautiful fragility of being human and all held in the most perfect love. And that is what the Buddha taught. Be with what is. Our intention is to move towards an open heart because the Buddha said when we practice this, our hearts are imbued with love and compassion and kindness and appreciative joy and equanimity. And we let it be what it is. And we bring love to that. We soften to whatever's right here. We make space for this moment because it can't be different from the way it is. We may want this, but how do we tend to this? And so this softening in each moment with each breath is how we greet the world. It's what we bring with us to the world. We bring our full selves. Even if a heart's afraid, we're tender to that. And it'll unfurl naturally. This practice, I'm not dead, so I'm not done. You've heard me say that before, maybe. I think I'm going to get that tattooed on me. I think I'm not dead, so I'm not done. And for years, I've talked about living with an undefended heart. And there are pieces of my heart that are open now. But there are also some pieces that are not. So I go, it's okay for those closed spaces. And I celebrate the pieces that are open. Because when I started this journey, someone said, what's it like inside? And there was a ball made out of a metal I couldn't identify. It was some alien metal that there was no getting into. But because of this practice, it's the what is it? The solvent that melts these toxins, that melts this stuff inside of us. So carry the idea of willingness to open. Intention, second factor of the Eightfold Path. Intention, and the Buddha said the intention is to renounce what doesn't serve, let go of what's causing suffering, and walk through the world with metta, karuna, which is compassion, and goodwill. That's the invitation of the Buddha. And then the teachings on how to do that. So I invite you to find that for yourselves. How can you tend to yourself and not harden to the world? So thanks so much, everyone, for your generous attention as always. And I hope this has been of some benefit. So now we have some time for any questions or comments. Any thoughts? Thank you again. A couple of announcements. I am going to throw in the chat a link to our donation page on our website. so that if you are inclined to offer dana. And for those in the room, there are a couple of baskets in the back. Dana is a way of supporting this community. It's the word that's often translated as generosity. And so you can support us financially. There's one basket for me, one basket for the center. We do pay rent, so we do need your support in that way. And then there's other ways of offering dana, generosity. Like one of the readings said, do what you can. And so volunteering is a beautiful practice of dana. So we can use a volunteer online here if somebody wants to be the person to put that link in the chat. That's helpful. Or we have some need for folks who can do some emailing stuff, some online stuff. So if you're a bit of a techie, let us know. If you want to help with this meeting, every week we have a couple of volunteers who set up. All they do is put the baskets out. The chairs are all taken care of. You don't have to do anything about that, but just put out the baskets and put them back in the box. It's really quite simple. So there's a sign-up sheet for that. So in the back also, but that's another way of being a part of a community. And it's about, what can I bring? How can I help? What can I offer? We have a beautiful gift of dana every week. Chris offers, there's so much love in what you do. Chris brings those amazing treats every week. What a beautiful gift of dana. So it doesn't have to look a particular way. So we're grateful for everything you can do, and it's really important, and it builds community. It builds community. And so for those of you who may be new, we have 4 meetings, 4 groups a week, one here on Sunday in person, the rest are online. There's a Tuesday talk that's online. There's a Wednesday peer-led sit, it's just a sit. And then Friday afternoon, if this talk was really challenging, Ian does metta every Friday afternoon. That's a great way to get into being connected to this practice of softening our hearts to ourselves and to others. And yeah, and I think that's it. And then there's a half day. We're going to do a half day in person on March 16th. That I'm going to be doing that. That'll be here, and the info should be going out in the next day or so. That'll be on the website, and you should get an email about that. Anything I'm missing, anyone? No? All right. I hear it's mid-century week here in Palm Springs. Yeah, and that's why the line to get up to the tram was like, what? I have to wait 2 lights to cross an intersection. Anyway, it's like LA. Anyway, so I am going to finish. We're going to end a little bit early today, so feel free to have some snacks. Feel free to hang out and chat with each other. We don't have to put the chairs away or anything. It's the beauty of Mizell. But I'm going to read a beautiful offering of merit that Ian wrote. For those of you who don't know, Ian is another one of our teachers here. And so this is going forth into this world so in need of light. May I bring all the kindness and wisdom I embody to each being in each situation that I meet. May the power of my practice today strengthen my resolve to be an agent of peace and justice in this world. Going forth together into this world so in need of light, may we together bring all the kindness and wisdom we embody to each being in each situation that we meet. May the power of our practice today strengthen our resolve to be agents of peace and justice in this world. We dedicate our practice for the liberation of all beings, the great, the small, the wise, the ignorant, the powerful, and the powerless. May all beings be liberated from sorrow and loss, hatred and injustice, scarcity and want, and every form of suffering. May our practice today be a prayer for peace and may it benefit all beings without exception. Thank you, everyone, and I will see you next time.